Need you to listen to me very carefully right now, because what I'm about to tell you is something I have spent the last 3 years trying to forget, and I can't. I have tried alcohol, therapy, moving to a different state, changing my phone number, throwing away every photograph from that night. None of it worked. The thing I saw inside that house does not stay in the past. It follows me here, into the present, into this room where I'm sitting right now with every single light turned on, recording this confession on a trembling voice I barely recognize as my own. I'm telling you this story not because I want to. I'm telling you because I genuinely believe, that if I don't get it out, if I don't give it somewhere to go, it is going to consume what is left of me entirely. If you are someone who believes that some places carry a weight that cannot be explained, that certain walls remember what happened inside them, then subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Real stories like this one go up every single day. What you're about to hear is not fiction. I need you to understand that before we go any further. The Mather House sat at the dead end of Weller Road in a part of rural West Virginia that doesn't have a proper name on any map I've ever seen. Locals simply called the area the Hollow, and looking back on that now, I understand with nauseating clarity why they chose that word. A hollow is an emptiness. A hollow is a place that should contain something living and instead contains only the memory of it. The house had been abandoned since 1987, though the full history of what happened to the family that lived there, the Mathers, was something that would take me years of obsessive research to piece together, most of which I'd rather not revisit here. What mattered then, in late October of 2021, was that I was 26 years old, I had a half-broken flashlight, a backpack with 2 bottles of water and a protein bar, and the absolute, catastrophic certainty of someone young and stupid that I was going to be fine. I had done urban exploration before. Abandoned hospitals, collapsed factories, a decommissioned prison outside Pittsburgh that smelled like mildew and something I still describe to myself as old sadness. I thought I understood abandoned places. I thought I had developed a relationship with them. I was wrong in a way so profound it almost defies language. My friend Caleb had found the Mather House on an online forum dedicated to urban exploration, the kind of place where people post GPS coordinates and blurry photographs and write things like, heavy vibes, would not revisit, in the comments section without going into further detail. He'd driven out to the entrance of Weller Road 2 weeks before our visit, taken one look at the tree line closing in around the gravel path and texted me, "I don't think I can do this one." That text should have been my first warning. Caleb was not a nervous person. He once walked through an asylum at 3 in the morning eating a sandwich. But the Mather House had stopped him at the road. He never explained why exactly. He just said it felt wrong in a way he couldn't rationalize, and that he'd been having strange dreams since he drove out there, dreams he wouldn't describe. I told him he was letting the internet forum get inside his head. I told him I'd go alone. I told myself I was braver than whatever had spooked him. And in the flat, fluorescent light of my apartment in Charleston, surrounded by my familiar things, I genuinely believed that. I drove out on a Thursday evening in late October, which in retrospect was perhaps the single most avoidable mistake I have ever made in my life. I told myself Thursday was practical. Fewer people around, less chance of running into other explorers or locals who might call the police. What I didn't fully account for was how early the darkness comes in the hollow that time of year, how the canopy of oak and hickory closes above the road like a set of interlocking fingers, and how profoundly, absolutely, completely alone you become once the last bar of cell signal disappears and the sound of your tires on gravel is the only sound in the entire world. I parked my car on a flat stretch of ground about a quarter mile from the house, far enough that it wouldn't be visible from the road, and I sat there for a long moment with the engine running and the heat blowing and my hands on the steering wheel, staring out through the windshield at the trees. The leaves had already turned by then, and in my headlights they looked the color of dried blood. I remember thinking that was a dramatic way to describe autumn leaves. I remember thinking I needed to stop being theatrical and just go do the thing I came to do. I turned off the engine. The darkness outside was immediate and total, the way darkness in cities never actually is, a darkness so complete and three-dimensional that it felt like a substance pressing against the glass rather than merely the absence of light. I pulled on my jacket, checked my flashlight, shouldered my backpack and got out of the car. The walk to the house took roughly 10 minutes along an overgrown path that must have once been a proper driveway. You could still see the ghost of it, 2 parallel ruts worn into the earth, now thick with yellowed grass and the occasional jagged rock that caught the beam of my flashlight and threw strange shadows up into the trees. The air smelled like cold mud and something faintly organic, faintly sweet in a way that I associated with fallen leaves decomposing, though there was an undercurrent beneath that smell that I couldn't quite identify. Something slightly metallic. Something slightly wrong. I kept moving. Owls called to each other somewhere deep in the trees, a sound I normally find comforting, and that night felt like a warning I couldn't parse. Twice I stopped because I thought I heard something moving in the underbrush to my left. A deliberate, rhythmic sound, too steady to be an animal startled by my presence, too slow to be anything running away. The third time I stopped and shone my flashlight directly into the trees and waited, and there was nothing there, and the sound had stopped, and the silence that replaced it was somehow worse than the sound had been. I kept walking. I told myself it was deer. I have never been less convinced of anything in my entire life. The Mather house revealed itself slowly. First, the roofline appeared above the treeline, a jagged silhouette against the indigo sky where two stars burned cold and remote. Then the upper windows, 4 of them across the second floor, dark and irregular, several panes cracked or missing entirely, the frames rotted into shapes that were almost but not quite rectangular, warped by 30 years of wet winters into something that resembled faces more than architecture. That was an effect of the light and the rot in my own overactive mind, I told myself. I still tell myself that, though with less conviction every time. The house grew as I approached it the way very large things grow when you walk toward them. Not gradually but in sudden increments, as if it kept lurching forward when I wasn't watching directly. It was a farmhouse, 2 stories, white paint that had long ago peeled away to reveal gray wood beneath, a wide porch that sagged in the middle like a broken spine. A brick chimney on the east side had partially collapsed, and the bricks lay scattered in the dead grass like broken teeth. The front door was open, not ajar, not slightly cracked, but open at a precise and deliberate seeming angle, perhaps 30 degrees, as if someone had very recently and very intentionally pushed it that way and walked inside. I stood at the foot of the porch steps for what felt like a very long time. I counted the steps. There were 5. I climbed them one at a time, testing each with my weight before committing, feeling the wood compress and shudder beneath me with a sound like a quiet groan. I put my hand on the doorframe. The wood was damp and cold in a way that felt almost alive, the way cold skin feels alive, and I pulled my hand away faster than I meant to. I crossed the threshold, and the house breathed in. That is not a metaphor. That is what happened. The moment I stepped fully inside, there was a movement of air, not a draft, not a breeze from an open window, but a distinct, directional inward movement, as if the house were inhaling through the front door, drawing the outside air in around me, and the sound of it was a low, soft, impossible exhalation from somewhere deep inside the walls. I froze. My flashlight beam cut across the entry hall, rotted floorboards, a collapsed coat rack, wallpaper that had peeled away in long curling strips that hung from the walls like shed skin, revealing the plaster beneath, which was stained with long brown watermarks that ran in vertical streams from ceiling to floor. The smell was different inside. Still the mud and decomposition from outside, but denser now, heavier, layered with something else. A closeted, pressurized smell, the smell of a space that has been sealed for decades and has been generating its own internal atmosphere in the dark. There was something else in it too. Something I could not name at the time. Something that I would not be able to name for years, until I was sitting in a doctor's office for reasons entirely unrelated to the Mather house and caught a faint trace of the same smell coming from an examination room down the hall, and I identified it instinctively, viscerally, before my conscious mind caught up. It was the smell of old blood. Dried and ancient and long absorbed into the walls, but present. Undeniably present. I moved carefully through the entry hall, stepping over debris, keeping my flashlight low and sweeping it slowly from side to side in the way experienced explorers do. Not because I expected to find anything in the corners, but because it is habit, because the habit of watching the periphery is what keeps you from missing things. On my right was the opening to a sitting room. I paused there and shone my light inside. The furniture was still in place, which is always the thing that gets me about abandoned houses. The furniture left behind, arranged in its original configurations as if waiting for someone to return and sit down. A sofa with the cushions caved in and covered in a gray-green mold. 2 armchairs facing the fireplace, their upholstery torn away in wide strips, the stuffing erupted from the wounds in dirty yellow clumps. A coffee table with a single ceramic mug still sitting on it, and inside the mug, a solid black mass that I recognized as the 34-year-old remains of tea or coffee. Above the fireplace, a mirror, the only object in the room that appeared completely undamaged, its glass intact, its gilt frame untarnished. I pointed my flashlight at it and watched my own reflection materialize in the beam. Pale, young, holding a flashlight, wearing a dark jacket, standing in the doorway of a room in a dead house in the middle of the woods. I watched my reflection for a moment. My reflection watched me back. And then, because the alternative was to keep staring at myself in the mirror of an abandoned house like a person on the verge of a breakdown, I turned away and moved down the hall. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and it was the first place where the cold became truly noticeable. Not the general ambient cold of an unheated building in October. This was a specific, localized cold, a pocket of temperature that hit me as I stepped through the kitchen doorway like stepping into a walk-in freezer. My breath fogged immediately. I exhaled and watched the vapor curl upward and disperse, and I told myself it was simply where the cold air pooled, a low spot in the house's thermal map, a perfectly explainable phenomenon. The kitchen was relatively intact, cabinets still hanging on the walls, a cast iron stove that must have weighed 600 pounds and hadn't gone anywhere, a round table with 3 chairs. 3 chairs. Not 4. I noticed that detail without knowing why it bothered me, and I kept moving, opening cabinet doors out of the reflex of exploration, finding nothing inside but mouse droppings, the dried carcasses of insects, and one shelf that held 3 glass jars with rusted lids, the contents of which were dark and liquid and which I did not open. On the wall beside the back door, someone, at some point in some era, had used a black marker to write a series of numbers at roughly eye level. They were arranged in rows and columns like a table, and there were a lot of them, and they were perfectly, meticulously neat in a way that felt more unsettling than if they had been scrawled or frantic. I photographed them with my phone. I have never been able to figure out what they mean. I have shown them to mathematicians, to cryptographers, to a woman who studies religious numerology. Nobody has offered an explanation that I found satisfying. The numbers are still on my phone. I should delete them. I don't. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at those numbers on the wall, when I heard the first sound from upstairs. It was a slow, heavy, deliberate sound, not the creak of settling wood, not the unpredictable groan of a building adjusting to temperature. It was footsteps. 1 and then a pause. 2 and then a pause. 3. Moving from what I judged to be the west side of the second floor toward the center. Moving at a pace that was almost too slow, the pace of someone who was trying very deliberately to be quiet, and who was not quite succeeding. I turned off my flashlight. I stood in the dark kitchen and I listened. The footsteps stopped. The house was absolutely silent, not the comfortable silence of empty spaces, but the held, watchful silence of something that knows you are there and is deciding what to do about it. My heart was loud in my ears. My hands were cold. I stood in the dark for what I estimated to be 3 full minutes, not moving, not making a sound, and nothing happened. And then, from somewhere directly above my head, from the floor of whatever room sat above the kitchen, there was a sound that was not a footstep and was not settling wood and was not any natural building noise I could explain. It was a dragging sound. Slow and deliberate and long, like something heavy being pulled across the floor on the other side of the ceiling. It moved from directly above me toward the center of the house and stopped. I should have left at that point. I want to be completely transparent with you about that. The rational response to unexplained footsteps and dragging sounds in an abandoned house in the woods at night was to walk back down the hall, out the front door, down the 5 porch steps, along the overgrown driveway and back to my car, and to drive away and never think about the Mather house again. I know that. I want you to understand that I know that. But I also want you to understand something about the particular psychology of fear in a dark place, which is that fear at a certain low-grade intensity does not produce the impulse to flee. It produces the impulse to know. It becomes a compulsion. The not knowing is worse than anything you might discover because the not knowing is infinite. Your mind can populate it with anything, and your mind, given complete freedom, will always populate it with the worst possible thing. What I knew, standing in that dark kitchen, was that there was a sound I could not explain coming from upstairs, and that I would not be able to sleep that night or possibly any night in the foreseeable future, unless I went upstairs and found its source. So I turned my flashlight back on, and I went to the stairs. The staircase rose from the main hall in a gentle curve that had once been elegant and was now a ruin. The banister was missing entirely, several balusters lying in the hallway below where they'd fallen, the carpet runner that had once covered the treads now a compressed strip of mold and fiber so rotted it had fused with the wood beneath it. I put my foot on the first step and it shrieked, a high, protracted sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the house, and I stopped and waited and listened. Nothing from upstairs. I climbed slowly, distributing my weight as close to the edges of each tread as I could, where the wood was structurally supported by the risers and less likely to give. The wall beside the staircase was covered in family photographs. This is something I hadn't expected and did not want to encounter. The photographs of the people who had lived here, 34 years dead or gone, staring down at me from their frames as I climbed toward whatever was waiting at the top of the stairs. They were ordinary family photographs, holidays, birthdays, what appeared to be a 4th of July gathering in the backyard, but the combination of age and moisture and the peculiar quality of my flashlight beam had transformed them into something deeply uncomfortable to look at. Colors had shifted or disappeared. Expressions looked different than they must have looked when they were taken. The contrast between light and shadow on faces creating the impression of anguish or fury where there had presumably once been simple holiday smiles. I kept my eyes forward. I did not look at the photographs. I continued to climb. At the top of the stairs, the second-floor hallway extended to my left and my right, running the full width of the house. Doors on both sides, for that I could see, 2 on each side, all closed. The flooring up here was bare wood, darker and more warped than the ground floor, and the smell was different again. Denser, warmer somehow despite the cold, with that metallic undercurrent stronger now, unmistakable. I stood at the top of the stairs and I shone my flashlight down the left branch of the hallway, then the right. Nothing. Nobody. For closed doors and a hallway full of darkness and the faint, steady drip of water somewhere I couldn't locate. And then the light in my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, 3 times, and went out. I stood at the top of the staircase in a darkness so complete it was indistinguishable from having my eyes shut, and I was aware, with every cell of my body, of the 4 closed doors around me and of the sound I had heard downstairs, and I was more frightened than I had ever been in my life. I shook the flashlight. I hit it against my palm. I twisted the head back and forth. Nothing. I fumbled in my backpack for my phone, turned on its camera light, and in that smaller, cooler beam of white light, I watched the door at the far end of the right hallway, the one directly opposite the top of the stairs, slowly, deliberately, silently swing open. I want to be very precise about what I observed. The door did not swing open because of a draft. There were no windows broken in that direction that could have produced a draft of sufficient force to move a heavy interior door on its hinges. The door was not already open and swinging on momentum. I had watched it from the moment my phone light came on, and it had been fully closed, and then it was open. It moved at a constant, unhurried speed, as if operated by a person of great calm and deliberation, and it stopped when it reached approximately 90 degrees, the full extent of its range of motion, and rested there. Through the opening, my phone light penetrated perhaps 6 feet before failing against the depth of whatever room lay beyond that I could see the edge of a window frame, a strip of floor, the bottom corner of what appeared to be a piece of furniture. A bed frame, the foot of it, metal or iron, dark with rust. I could see nothing else. And from inside the room, through the open door, came a sound. Quiet enough that I initially thought I was imagining it. Quiet enough that I pressed my back against the wall behind me and held completely still and stopped breathing so I could hear it properly. It was a voice. Low and without discernible words and rhythmic in a way that reminded me of a lullaby or a prayer. Something repeated, something memorized, something said so many times it has been stripped down to pure incantation. The meaning dissolved and only the sound remaining. It rose and fell. It continued without stopping. It came from inside the open room at the end of the hall, and it was the sound of a human voice, and there was nobody living in this house, and there had been nobody living in this house for 34 years. I did not move for a very long time. My back was against the wall. My phone was in my hand, its camera light pointed at the ceiling, giving me just enough ambient illumination to see the hallway around me, the closed doors, the water-stained walls, the warped floorboards, the open door at the end. The voice continued. I began to be able to distinguish something in it, not words exactly but a pattern. There were 2 sounds that recurred more than others. Soft sounds, vowel-heavy, slipping in and out of the rhythm. I cannot reproduce them for you. I have tried, and every time I get close to the right sound something in me shuts it down, some deep and wordless instinct that says, "No, don't make that sound, don't call that sound out of your own throat, some sounds belong only to the dark." I stood there for what my phone log later told me was 11 minutes. The voice did not stop or change. It simply continued, steady and low and deeply, fundamentally wrong. Wrong in the way a flaw in the visual field is wrong, something your brain keeps returning to, something that resists rationalization because the wrongness is not in the logic but in the sensation, the gut-level physical response of an organism recognizing something it was never meant to encounter. Then my phone light went out too. Battery at 0, the screen said for half a second before going black, and I was standing in absolute darkness at the top of a staircase in an abandoned house with a voice coming out of an open door 10 feet from where I stood, and my only coherent thought was, "Do not run." Not because running would have been wrong. Because the stairs were behind me and I could not see them, and if I ran I would fall. I pressed myself flat against the wall and I moved sideways, 1 step at a time, feeling the baseboard against my heel, until I found the top of the staircase with my foot. I turned. I put my hand on the wall and I went down the stairs in complete darkness, 1 step at a time, and the voice behind me continued without pause, and at the bottom of the stairs I turned toward the front door and I walked, still not running, still careful, still holding myself together by pure force of, and then I stopped walking. Because there was something standing at the end of the front hallway. between me and the front door. In the dark, which should have meant I could not see it. But I could. Not because there was any light source. I still do not have an adequate explanation for this. I could see it the way you can sometimes see the shape of a piece of furniture in a completely dark room, not by looking directly at it, but by the sense of something displacing the darkness, of an absence of something where the dark should have been uniform and was not. It was tall. It was very still. It was standing directly between me and the front door, and it was facing me, and whatever seeing meant in that context, I was being seen. I have spent 3 years trying to describe this to people. To my therapist, to my closest friends, to a researcher at a university who studies reported encounters with what she calls non-standard phenomena. Nobody has given me the right words because I don't think the right words exist in ordinary language. What I experienced in that hallway was not simply visual. It was total. It was an apprehension of something, of a presence, of an entity, of a fact, that bypassed the normal channels of sense and registered directly, pre-linguistically, in the part of the brain that predates language, the part that has been keeping humans alive since before we knew how to name the things that could kill us. Every hair on my body stood up. Every surface of my skin contracted. My vision, such as it was in that darkness, tunneled. Time became unreliable in a way I can only describe as a skipping. Not slow, not fast, but uneven, stuttering, as if my nervous system were dropping frames. I was aware of my own heartbeat in an extraordinarily specific way. I was aware of the sound of my breathing and how loud it was. I was aware that whatever was in the hallway with me was absolutely, profoundly, and with complete attention aware of me. It did not move. That was the thing that broke me, that was the thing my mind kept snagging on in the moment and in the 3 years since. It did not move. It stood at the end of the hall with absolute stillness, the way things that have never needed to hurry are still, not frozen, not paralyzed, but simply unbothered by time in a way that living things are not. And then the thing happened. The thing I have never told anyone in its full detail, not my therapist, not my friends, not the researcher. The thing I am telling you now because I have run out of places to put it. The thing standing in the hallway tilted its head, slowly, to one side. The way a person tilts their head when they are considering something. The way a person tilts their head when they have just thought of something interesting. And then, in the darkness of a house with no electricity, with no light source of any kind, with my phone dead and my flashlight dead and the moon fully obscured by cloud cover outside, the mirror above the fireplace in the sitting room lit up. Not with reflected light. It simply produced light, a cold, flat, sourceless illumination that spilled through the sitting room doorway and into the hall, and in that light I saw the hallway clearly, and I saw that it was empty, and I saw the front door standing open at its familiar 30-degree angle, and I walked to it, and I went through it, and I went down the 5 porch steps without stopping, and I walked down the driveway, and I walked to my car, and I sat in my car and I shook for 45 minutes before I was able to start the engine. The drive home took 3 hours. I remember almost none of it. I arrived at my apartment at 2:15 in the morning, and I know this because I checked my phone compulsively every 10 or 15 minutes for the rest of that night, as if the numbers on the screen, real, grounded, ordinary numbers telling me an ordinary time, could anchor me to the ordinary world I had apparently been living in before I walked into the Mather house. I showered for a very long time. I turned on every light in my apartment. I sat on my couch wrapped in a blanket and watched television without registering anything that was on it, and when the sun finally came up I felt a relief so overwhelming that tears ran down my face and I didn't even notice them until they were dripping off my chin. In the daylight, with traffic sounds coming through the window and my familiar furniture around me and coffee brewing in the kitchen, the events of the night before felt simultaneously absolutely real and completely impossible, the way certain dreams feel when you try to hold them in the waking mind. They don't dissolve, exactly, but they refuse to settle into the available categories. This did not happen, some part of me said. This happened, every other part of me said back. Both things remained true at the same time for days. The first strange thing happened 4 days after my visit. I was at work. I was a graphic designer at a small marketing firm in Charleston, and my workspace was a corner desk with 2 large monitors and a view of a parking structure. When I opened a design file I'd been working on before the Mather House trip and found, embedded in the file, a layer I had not created. The layer contained nothing but numbers, arranged in rows and columns, perfectly neat, in a font that did not exist in my software's library. They were the same numbers that had been written on the kitchen wall of the Mather House. I sat at my desk and I stared at them for a very long time. I called our IT person over and showed him the file. He looked at the layer, looked at me and said he had no idea how a rogue layer had appeared in an existing file, and that it was probably a software glitch, and that I should save a copy of the original and delete the layer, which I did, and then I went to the bathroom and sat in a stall for 10 minutes pressing my hands flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. That was the first thing. There were others. I began to hear the sound from the staircase hallway in my apartment at night. Not constantly, not every night, but with a frequency that increased over the first several months after the visit. A dragging sound, slow and deliberate, coming from the room directly above my unit. I lived on the 4th floor. There was no 5th floor. My building had 4 stories. The sound came from above the ceiling of my 4th floor apartment, from a space that, according to the building's blueprints, which I obtained from the property manager after the 3rd or 4th occurrence, by then willing to do anything that might produce an explanation, contained nothing but the roof structure and an HVAC unit. I had maintenance come and inspect the HVAC unit. Nothing wrong with it. No animals in the roof space. No explanation for the sound. I bought earplugs. I moved my bedroom to the other side of the apartment. The sound followed me. It was always slow and always deliberate and always moved from one side of the ceiling to the center and stopped, which is exactly what it had done in the Mather house, in the room above the kitchen, and the exactness of the repetition was in some ways the most disturbing aspect of it. Not that the sound was supernatural, but that it was consistent, that it had rules, that whatever was producing it understood patterns and had chosen, apparently, to apply the pattern of the Mather house to the ceiling of my apartment. I began researching the Mather house obsessively approximately 6 months after my visit, partly out of the investigative impulse that had always been part of my character and partly because obsessive research is a way of containing fear, of transforming something irrational and uncontrollable into something with a history, a cause, an explanation that fits into the available categories. What I found was not comforting. The Mather family, Gerald and Evelyn Mather and their 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, had moved into the Weller Road house in 1971. For approximately 15 years, by all available accounts, they were an unremarkable rural family. Gerald farmed, Evelyn raised the children, the kids went to the local school, the family attended the local church, people in the surrounding area described them as quiet but pleasant. The daughter, whose name was Ruth, was apparently remarkable for her intelligence. Teachers at the school remembered her years later as genuinely exceptional, the kind of student who appears once in a generation, someone who thought in ways that didn't resemble the thinking of other children her age. Several people described her as unusual. One former teacher, interviewed by a local newspaper in 1989, used the word unsettling. When pressed to elaborate, the teacher had said only that Ruth had an attention that made you feel observed in an uncomfortably complete way, as if she were not merely looking at you but cataloging you, filing you away. In 1986, something changed. The specifics were difficult to establish with certainty from the sources I had access to: local newspaper archives, county records, a self-published history of the area written by a retired schoolteacher in 2003. What I was able to piece together was this. In the spring of 1986, Gerald Mather called the county sheriff's office 4 times in a period of approximately 3 months. None of the 4 calls resulted in any official record more detailed than a log entry: disturbance call, no action taken, which was either reassuring or the opposite, depending on your interpretation. In August of 1986, the older son, whose name was Thomas, left home at the age of 17 and never returned. He was located the following month at a bus station in Cincinnati, apparently unharmed, and when a social worker spoke to him, he reportedly refused to discuss his family or the house, said only that he could not stay there any longer, and requested placement with a foster family. He was never returned to his parents. In the fall of 1986, Ruth Mather stopped attending school. She was 14 years old. The school's records noted, withdrawn by family, with no further explanation. The house was abandoned in April of 1987. A neighbor reported that they had simply not seen the family for several weeks, that the lights had stopped coming on at night, that the dog had stopped barking. When the sheriff investigated, the house was found exactly as I found it. Furniture in place, dishes in the kitchen, the mug on the coffee table. Gerald and Evelyn Mather and their youngest son were never found. Ruth was never found. Thomas, living under a different name in a different state, was located by a journalist in 2001 and agreed to a brief interview, during which he said nothing of substance about his family except one sentence that the journalist included in his article almost as an aside, buried in the penultimate paragraph. There was something in that house that my sister found and that I believe she let in. I don't know what it was. I know it was old. I know it was hungry. Then he ended the interview and the journalist never heard from him again. I read that sentence sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee, and I read it 3 times, and then I set down my coffee very carefully and I sat very still for a while. 8 months after my visit to the Mather house, I moved apartments. The dragging sound above my ceiling had not stopped, and I had not been sleeping properly, and I had lost 12 pounds, and my friends were beginning to ask whether I was okay in the particular careful way that means they have already decided the answer is no. I found a ground floor unit on the other side of the city, signed the lease, packed my things and moved on a Saturday in June. The new apartment was bright and pleasant and on a street with trees and a coffee shop on the corner, and I felt, for approximately the first week, that I had made the right decision. That distance from the old apartment, new walls, new smells, a new window to look out of in the morning, had done what $300 a session of therapy had not quite managed, which was to put enough space between me and the Mather house that it began to feel like something that had happened to someone else, something I had read about rather than lived. I began to sleep again. I began to eat. I began, cautiously and with a relief I felt physically in my chest, to believe that whatever I had encountered in the Mather house had remained in the Mather house. On the 9th night in my new apartment, I woke up at 3:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the moment I opened my eyes, as I had been doing every night for 8 months. I lay on my back in the dark and I looked at the ceiling and the ceiling looked back, and I was about to close my eyes and try to go back to sleep when I noticed that there was a light coming from the living room. Not the standby light of an electronic device. Not the light from a street lamp bleeding through a curtain gap. A steady, sourceless, cold, flat illumination. The same quality and color of light I had seen come from the mirror in the sitting room of the Mather house on the night I saw the thing in the hallway. I lay in my bed for 11 seconds. I counted. Then I got up. I walked to the bedroom door. I pushed it open. I looked into the living room. I had not yet hung anything on the walls of the new apartment. I had been there 9 days, boxes still unpacked, walls bare, except for one thing. The antique mirror I had bought at an estate sale 3 years before I visited the Mather house. The mirror I had lived with for 3 years without incident. The mirror that I had carried wrapped in a moving blanket from the old apartment to the new one because I liked the frame. The mirror I had hung on the living room wall 2 days after moving in because it was the one familiar object in an unfamiliar space and I wanted something of my own looking back at me. The mirror was producing that light. And in the mirror, reflected in a room that was not my living room, that was not any room I had ever seen before, standing and facing the glass from the other side, was the shape I had seen in the hallway of the Mather house. So, patient. Its head tilted at precisely the same angle. And when I looked at it, when our eyes met through the glass, though I could not clearly see its eyes, though I am not certain it had eyes in any conventional sense, it slowly, deliberately raised one hand and placed the palm flat against the inside of the glass. From my side, from the correct side, from the world where I was standing in my living room in a new apartment on a street with trees and a coffee shop on the corner, the mirror's surface bulged outward by approximately 1/4 of an inch beneath that palm. Like cloth. Like skin. I sold the mirror the next morning. I carried it out to the sidewalk at 7 a.m. and I put a free sign on it and I went back inside and I watched from the window until a man in a pickup truck stopped and loaded it into his bed and drove away. I don't know who he was. I tried to flag him down, to tell him something, to warn him. I stood on the sidewalk with my mouth open and I could not find the words in time, could not assemble a sentence that would convey to a stranger loading a mirror into his truck on a Sunday morning what I needed him to understand, and he drove away. I think about him sometimes. I think about where the mirror is now. I have thought about hiring a private investigator to track down the man's license plate and find the mirror, and I have thought about what I would do if I found it, and I have not been able to answer that question, so I have not hired anyone. I still hear the dragging sound sometimes. Less frequently now, perhaps 4 or 5 times a year, always between 3 and 4 in the morning, always moving from one side of the ceiling to the center and stopping. I have lived in 3 apartments since the Mather house and it follows me to each of them. I have accepted, with the blunt pragmatism that I have found to be the only survivable response to an impossible situation, that it will follow me to wherever I go next. I have researched exorcism and I have researched protective rituals from a variety of traditions, and I have researched what happens, neurologically, when a person experiences extreme fear and whether the patterns it burns into the nervous system could produce persistent sensory hallucinations, and the answer to that last one is yes. Technically, theoretically, the brain under severe stress can generate experiences that are sensory in character but not rooted in external stimuli. I have told myself this explanation many times. It does not explain the mirror bulging outward. It does not explain the numbers in my design file. It does not explain the information I found in the county records, which I haven't told you about yet, which I have been working up to since I started this recording. In the county records, buried in a batch of documents related to the Mather family's land title, I found a property survey from 1959, 12 years before the Mathers moved in. The survey was a standard document, recording the dimensions of the land, the location of the structures, the borders with neighboring properties. There was one annotation in the surveyor's handwriting in the margin beside the description of the main house. Seller reports persistent complaint structure. Previous tenants, 3 families, total period of occupancy approximate 14 years. All vacated without notice, no explanation given to seller. Recommend further inspection before title transfer. No further inspection was documented in any record I could find. The title transferred in 1959 to a family named Creighton. The Creightons lived in the house from 1959 to 1966 and left without notice. The family after them stayed 18 months. The Mathers came in 1971 and lasted 15 years, longer than anyone, and whatever Ruth Mather found or opened or allowed in during that time had been waiting, I was beginning to understand, for much, much longer than 15 years or 34 years, or the entire recorded history of that house. There was something in the hollow of the earth beneath the Mather house that was so old the concept of time as I understood it did not really apply to it, and Ruth, with her particular and terrible quality of attention, had looked at it directly, had made contact with it, had perhaps spoken to it in the language of those numbers on the kitchen wall, and whatever transaction she had completed in that house, whatever exchange she had made with what lived in the dark beneath it, I had walked into the middle of it on a Thursday evening in late October, with my half-broken flashlight and my protein bar, full of the breezy confidence of someone who had never encountered anything they could not eventually explain. I am finishing this recording on a Wednesday night in March. It is 11:47. All the lights in my apartment are on. I am sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I haven't touched, and outside my window the city is doing its ordinary, wonderful, relentlessly normal things. A car passes, someone's dog barks twice, the heating system clicks and hums. Ordinary sounds. Sounds that belong to the daylit world. I hold on to them. I have learned to hold on to them. I have learned a lot of things in 3 years that I would rather not know. About the history of the Mather house, about the nature of what lives in it, about the way certain places carry their history inside their walls like a disease, patient and contagious and waiting for someone to walk through the door. I have learned that there are spaces in the world that function like traps. Not maliciously, necessarily, not designed by any intent, but simply structural, the way a pitfall is structural, the way a current is structural. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to be there. I think about Ruth Mather sometimes. I think about a 14-year-old girl in a farmhouse in the Hollow, with an intelligence that her teachers found unsettling and an attention that made people feel catalogued, lying awake at night listening to the sounds of the house, perhaps beginning to understand, perhaps long before anyone else in the family understood, that there was a conversation to be had in that place, that the numbers on the wall were not graffiti but notation, that the cold in the kitchen was not a draft but a presence, that the thing beneath the floor had been waiting for precisely her particular quality of mind. I think she found it. I think she spoke to it in its language and it spoke back in hers, and whatever was exchanged between them is still being exchanged, because whatever lives in the Mather house does not experience endings the way we do. I think of her the way I think of someone who has been swallowed by something enormous, not destroyed, not gone, but contained, absorbed, still in there somewhere in the dark, impossibly deep, impossibly far from the surface where the light is. I hope I am wrong about this. I do not believe I am wrong about this. Last week I found a new forum post about the Mather house. Someone, a username I didn't recognize, an account created the same day as the post, had uploaded 2 photographs. The first was the front of the house, the porch, the 5 steps, the open door at its familiar 30-degree angle. The second was taken from inside the house, looking up the staircase. The banister I remembered as missing was back. The carpet runner was intact, clean, recently vacuumed. The wall photographs were still in their frames, faces turned toward the camera. And at the top of the stairs, where the hallway branched left and right, a figure stood in the shadows. Not hidden, not obscured, but standing with what I can only describe as deliberate visibility, with a particular, patient stillness of something that has decided to stop pretending it isn't there. The figure was tall. Its head was tilted to one side. And in the comments section below the photographs, with no other context, no explanation, no reply to any of the other comments, someone had written, in clean, perfectly spaced letters, a single line: "We remember everyone who visits." The comment was posted at 3:17 in the morning. The account that posted it no longer exists. I checked the metadata on the second photograph before I closed the tab. The timestamp said it was taken last Thursday. Last Thursday, I drove past the entrance to Weller Road on my way home from my sister's house. I don't know why I took that route. I don't usually go that way. I don't remember deciding to. I need you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I need you to understand that I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or curses or things that go bump in the night. I am, or I was, a pragmatist. An engineer by trade, someone who spent his days solving problems with measurable solutions, someone who trusted blueprints and load-bearing calculations and the cold, indifferent comfort of mathematics. I believed in cause and effect. I believed that every strange sound had a mundane explanation, that every shadow had a source, that the universe, for all its complexity, operated on rules that could be understood and cataloged and filed away neatly in the part of the brain that says yes, this makes sense, you can sleep now. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. And the thing that destroyed that capacity in me, the thing that reached into the part of my brain where certainty used to live and tore it out by the roots, was a house. A house on the edge of Millhaven Road, 12 miles outside a town so small it doesn't appear on most maps, sitting at the end of a gravel driveway so overgrown that the first time I drove past it, I genuinely did not know it was there. That's the part that gets me even now when I'm sitting in my apartment with every light on and the television running at low volume just to fill the silence. Even now, the part that I cannot reconcile is this: the house found me, not the other way around. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds, and I'm asking you to stay with me anyway because by the time I'm finished, you will understand that I'm not speaking metaphorically. That house on Millhaven Road reached out across whatever distance separates the real from the wrong, and it pulled me toward it the way a drain pulls water. Inevitable. Spiraling. Down. It started 3 weeks after my divorce was finalized. I'm telling you that not for sympathy, I'm well past needing sympathy, but because it explains why I was on Millhaven Road in the first place, at 7 in the evening on a Tuesday in late October, driving with no particular destination in mind. My therapist at the time, a perfectly reasonable woman named Dr. Ash, had suggested that I spend more time outdoors. She called it regrounding. She meant hiking trails and farmers markets and perhaps a yoga class. What I did, because I have never been particularly good at following instructions, was get in my car and drive. I drove for 2 hours through the Pennsylvania countryside with the windows cracked and the radio off, watching the sky go from burnt orange to bruised purple to the particular shade of black that only exists in places far from city lights, and I felt, for the first time in months, something adjacent to peace. I almost missed the driveway entirely. The gravel was so thoroughly consumed by grass and weeds that it looked like nothing more than a slight gap in the tree line, an absence rather than a presence. What caught my eye, and I have replayed this moment so many times that I've worn grooves in it, looking for the part where I should have turned away, was the light. A single light, pale and yellowish, visible through the trees at a distance I couldn't quite judge. My first thought was that someone was camping. My second thought was that a farmhouse this deep in the rural countryside might have a tenant in trouble, someone elderly, perhaps, in need of assistance. My third thought, the one I should have listened to, was that the light looked wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not horror movie wrong. Just subtly, inexplicably, fundamentally wrong in a way I couldn't articulate then and still struggle to describe now. It was too still. Lights flicker. Lanterns sway. Even a steady electric bulb has some faint variation, some microscopic pulse that your eye registers below the threshold of conscious thought. This light had none of that. It was as static as a photograph, as if someone had pasted a circle of pale yellow onto the darkness and called it illumination. I pulled over. I sat in my car for perhaps 2 minutes, long enough for the sensible part of my brain to say leave it alone. There are 1,000 reasonable explanations. Drive home, heat up soup, watch something forgettable on television. And then I got out of the car. Because I was lonely and I was lost in a way that had nothing to do with geography, and because some part of me, the part that my divorce had left raw and exposed and reaching, responded to that light the way a cold person responds to fire. Without thinking. Without caution. The driveway was perhaps 60 feet long. It felt longer. The trees pressed in on both sides in a way that made me acutely aware of how narrow the corridor was, how completely the canopy overhead blocked the sky, and by the time the house came into full view I had the distinct and unshakable impression that I had walked much farther than 60 feet. That the road behind me was not simply hidden but gone. I didn't turn around to check. I realize now that not turning around was the first of many decisions that I will spend the rest of my life questioning. The house was a farmhouse, or had been one, probably built sometime in the early 20th century based on the architectural details I could make out in the thin moonlight. A wide front porch with decorative wooden trim, a steep pitched roof, double-hung windows with heavy frames, a central chimney that had partially collapsed at some point and been left that way. 2 stories. White paint peeling in long strips like sunburned skin. The front door was not just unlocked but standing open by perhaps 4 inches, and from that gap came the yellow light I had seen from the road. No sound. No movement. Nothing to suggest occupation, and yet nothing to suggest the casual abandonment of a property left to decay naturally. It existed in some intermediate state that I could not categorize, and my brain, desperate for a category, kept cycling through possibilities and rejecting them. "Hello?" I called from the porch steps. My voice landed flat and dead in the air, absorbed rather than echoed, as if the house swallowed sound. There was no response. I stood there for a long moment, one hand on the porch railing, cold, the wood unnaturally cold for an October evening that wasn't particularly frigid, and told myself I was checking for a welfare situation, that I was being a responsible citizen, that I would look inside, confirm that the space was empty, perhaps find the source of the light, and leave. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first room was a foyer, wide and bare, with a hardwood floor so warped and buckled that walking across it required attention. Wallpaper, some faded floral pattern in shades of green and cream, peeled away from the plaster in great curling sheets. A staircase ran up along the right wall, its railing intact but several of its balusters missing, giving it a gap-toothed look that made me think, absurdly, of a mouth. Straight ahead was a hallway with 3 doors visible, all closed. To the left was an archway leading into what I assumed was a living room or parlor, and it was from that archway that the light was coming. Not a warm domestic light, not the yellowy warmth of a lamp, but that same cold, static illumination I'd seen from the road. I went left. The parlor was large by farmhouse standards, maybe 20 by 20 feet, with a brick fireplace along the far wall that showed signs of long disuse, its grate rusted and filled with ancient ash. There was furniture. That was the first thing that struck me, the fact that there was furniture at all in a house this clearly abandoned. A sofa along one wall, its upholstery faded to the color of old bone. 2 armchairs facing the fireplace. A low table between them on which sat, of all things, a glass of water. Not dusty, not stagnant. A glass of clear water that caught the light in a way that suggested it was fresh. I stood in the archway staring at that glass for an embarrassingly long time, because it was the first piece of evidence that someone had been here recently, and yet the silence of the house was so complete, so thorough, so absolute that the idea of recent human presence felt genuinely impossible. The light, I realized, had no source I could identify. It was simply there, distributed throughout the room in equal measure, with no brighter center and no shadows falling in any direction. That wasn't how light worked. That wasn't how light ever worked. In any lit room, even one with multiple sources, there is variation, there is directionality, there are shadows that tell you where the illumination originates. Here there was none of that. The room was simply lit, the way a room in a dream is lit, without cause, without shadow, without logic. I ran through explanations. Bioluminescence from some form of mold or fungus. Reflected moonlight from some angle I couldn't calculate. A form of static electricity. My brain offered these explanations and then quietly discarded each of them, and what I was left with was the understanding that the light was wrong and the glass of water was wrong and the temperature of the room was wrong. Colder than the foyer, colder than outside, cold in a way that didn't diminish with time spent inside it but instead seemed to deepen, as if the room were radiating cold the way a furnace radiates heat. I should have left then. I should have turned around in the archway, walked back through the foyer, descended the porch steps, gone back down the driveway and found my car and driven until I hit a town with a gas station and fluorescent lights and the noise of ordinary human life. Instead, I took out my phone and started taking photographs. Engineer brain. Document the anomaly. Find the rational explanation. My phone's camera captured a room that looked perfectly normal. The strange even light translated on screen to nothing more unusual than adequate ambient illumination. The furniture, the fireplace, the glass of water, all present, all mundane. I stared at the photographs and then looked up at the room and then back at the photographs, and the photographs said nothing is wrong here while the room I was standing in said something was wrong with every single one of my senses simultaneously. I put my phone away. I crossed to the glass of water and crouched down to look at it closely. No dust on the rim. No film on the surface. A tiny bubble clinging to the inside of the glass, the kind of bubble that appears in water that has been poured very recently. My hand was shaking, I noticed, though I wasn't frightened, not exactly. It was more like my body had registered something my conscious mind was still refusing to process. I did not touch the glass. I stood up, turned around, and walked back toward the foyer. The foyer now had 5 doors. I stopped so abruptly that my heel caught on a buckled floorboard and I stumbled, catching myself on the wall with both palms. I stood there pressed against the peeling wallpaper and counted the doors in the hallway ahead of me with the careful, deliberate attention of a person who desperately wants to be wrong. 1 on the left. 1 in the center. one on the right, and beyond it, where I was absolutely certain there had been nothing but a stretch of bare wall, 2 more. 5 doors. I had counted 3 when I entered. I had registered 3 doors with the automatic peripheral competence of someone trained to assess spatial environments. There had been 3 doors. I walked forward slowly, examining each door as I passed. The first 3 looked identical: white painted wood, simple brass knobs, a horizontal crack near each knob where the wood had expanded and contracted through decades of seasons. The 4th and 5th doors looked different. Older. The wood was darker, almost black at the grain, and the knobs were not brass but iron, the kind of iron that develops a particular reddish patina that looks uncomfortably like dried blood. I touched the knob of the 4th door and pulled my hand back immediately. It was warm. In a house that was uniformly, impossibly cold, this door's knob was warm in the specific way that a surface is warm when something warm has recently touched it. When someone's hand has recently held it. I was not alone in this house. I knew that now. Some part of me had known it from the moment I stepped into the foyer, from that first moment when my voice landed flat and absorbed in the air. Something in the house had been listening. I backed away from the 4th door and stood in the center of the hallway and said loudly, more loudly than I intended, "If someone is here, please say something. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand what's happening." Nothing said anything back. But somewhere above me on the 2nd floor there was a sound. Not a creak, not the settling of old wood that every old house produces. Something more deliberate than that. A sound like someone taking a single careful step, then stopping. 1 step. And then silence so absolute it pressed against my eardrums. I went upstairs. I know. But I want you to understand that by this point the decision to leave felt less available to me than it had 15 minutes earlier. The house had its hooks in me, not in any supernatural way I can clearly describe, but in the way that a mystery has hooks, in the way that a question you cannot stop asking keeps you up at night. I needed to understand what I was experiencing. I needed to fit it into a framework, into a shape my engineering brain could hold. So I climbed the stairs, keeping my hand on the railing and testing each step before committing my weight, and I came up into a 2nd floor hallway that was longer than the width of the house should have allowed. That was the moment I felt real fear for the first time. Not the low-grade unease of the parlor, not the cold alarm of the appearing doors. Fear. Proper, cold sweat, heart rate spiking fear, because the geometry was wrong in a way that was immediately and undeniably apparent. The 2nd floor hallway stretched ahead of me for at least 40 feet, with doors on both sides at regular intervals. I counted 7 before I stopped counting because the hallway seemed to be getting longer even as I watched it, the far end retreating by degrees too small to be certain of but too consistent to dismiss. The house was perhaps 30 feet wide at its widest. This hallway was twice that and growing. I turned around. The top of the staircase was there, reassuringly solid. I could go back. I stood facing the stairs for what felt like a full minute, breathing carefully, running through what I knew. Old house. Possibly structural irregularities I hadn't accounted for. Stress response affecting my spatial perception. Low light conditions. I turned back around. The hallway had 4 doors. Not 7. 4 evenly spaced, 2 on each side, at a length from the staircase that was entirely consistent with the width of the house as seen from outside. I pressed my back against the wall at the top of the stairs and stared at those 4 doors and tried to remember with absolute precision what I had seen. 7 doors. A hallway getting longer. I had seen it. I had seen it with the same eyes that had earned me 2 engineering degrees, that had caught a critical miscalculation in a bridge design that would have killed people, that I trusted more than almost anything else I possessed in the world. I had seen 7 doors and a hallway like a throat. Now there were 4 and the proportions were ordinary. I chose the first door on the left because it was closest, and I opened it with the controlled deliberateness of someone choosing not to run. It opened into a bedroom. Small, spare, a rusted iron bed frame with a bare mattress, striped ticking dirty with age. A window with a cracked pane. A wardrobe standing open and empty. Normal. Utterly, aggressively normal. I stood in the doorway taking inventory with obsessive thoroughness, noting every detail, building a mental blueprint of the space. 12 by 14. Ceiling height approximately 8 feet. Single door, the one I'd come through. Window on the north wall, overlooking what would be the back of the house. I looked out the window. The backyard was a sea of high grass under the moonlight, silver and flat, extending to a treeline perhaps 100 feet back. And standing at the edge of the treeline, at the exact center of the tree line, was a figure. Human in silhouette, 2 arms, 2 legs, and upright posture, but wrong in proportions I couldn't specify at this distance, wrong in the way the figure held itself, which was with a stillness that exceeded even the stillness of the light downstairs. Not the stillness of someone standing quietly. The stillness of something that had been standing in exactly that position for a very, very long time. The figure was looking at the house. At this window. At me. I stepped back from the window so fast I hit the bed frame with the back of my knees and sat down hard on the mattress, and the mattress made a sound beneath me, a deep, settling creak, and then from directly below from the first floor came an answering sound. That same creak. Identical. As if something on the first floor had responded to the sound I'd made, had mimicked it, had heard me and replied in the only language it knew. I don't know how long I sat on that mattress. Long enough for my heart rate to come down from the ceiling. Long enough for the cold of the room to sink through my jacket and into my shoulders and spread down my arms. I sat and I breathed and I looked at the window and I did not get up to look at the tree line again, because some deeply instinctual part of me had decided that looking at the figure again was the specific action that would make things irreversibly worse. I don't know how to explain that instinct more clearly. It was the certainty you feel about touching an open flame. A knowledge that predates language. I finally got up and went back out into the hallway. 4 doors, same as before. I checked my phone. I'd been in the house for 40 minutes, which felt both impossible and somehow also completely accurate. I had no signal, which in rural Pennsylvania is ordinary, except that I had had 2 bars at the car and I would have expected to maintain them in a building this close to the road. The phone said 8:47 p.m. I pocketed it and moved to the next door. The second bedroom was larger, with a window on the east wall and a small attached bathroom through a door in the right-hand corner. The bathroom had a mirror above the sink, and when I turned on my phone's flashlight and angled it toward the mirror, I discovered that my reflection was not doing quite what I was doing. It took me several seconds to identify the discrepancy because it was so slight. My reflection moved when I moved, blinked when I blinked, turned its head when I turned mine. But there was a delay. Approximately a quarter of a second, no more than half. A lag between my actions and my reflection's response that should not have been physiologically possible, since reflection is instantaneous and my brain's processing of it does not create delay. I knew this. I knew this absolutely. And yet I raised my right hand in front of the mirror, slowly, and my reflection raised its right hand a half-second later. I waved. My reflection waved back, and in the moment before it completed the wave, its face, my face, had an expression on it that I had not chosen, an expression that did not match my own features at all. It looked, for that fraction of a second, curious. Not frightened. Not neutral. Curious. Interested. As if whatever was wearing my face in that mirror was examining me the same way I was examining it, and finding me deeply, profoundly fascinating. I turned my flashlight off. I stood in the dark bathroom and I said to no one, to the house, to whatever inhabited the space between my actions and my reflection's delayed response, I know you're here. My voice shook. I hated how much it shook. I don't know what you are and I'm not going to pretend I do. But I know you're here and I know you're watching me, and I need you to understand that I'm leaving now. The house said nothing. The dark said nothing. But from the mirror in the dark came a small and very quiet sound. The sound of fingernails, or something functionally equivalent to fingernails, tapping twice against glass from the wrong side. I left the bathroom. I left the bedroom. I walked back into the hallway and toward the stairs, and I did not allow myself to run, because running felt like the thing that would break the specific tension holding the situation in its current state, and I was terrified of what would rush in to fill the space that breaking created. I reached the top of the stairs. I went down. My footsteps on each step were careful and quiet and deliberate, and they were the only footsteps I heard, which was its own particular kind of wrongness because I had been certain, completely viscerally certain, that I would hear something following me. I reached the foyer. I turned toward the front door. The front door was gone. Not locked. Not blocked. Gone. Where the front door had been was a section of wall identical to every other section of wall in the foyer, the same peeling wallpaper, the same cracked plaster, the same yellowed baseboards. There was no seam, no outline, no hinged shadow. The wall was simply continuous, and it had always, the house seemed to insist, been continuous. The doorway I had walked through 40 minutes ago, the doorway with the 4-inch gap that had admitted that impossible light, did not exist. I turned to my left, turned to my right. The foyer was exactly as I had observed it, stairs on the right, archway to the parlor on the left, hallway straight ahead. And no front door. I walked to the wall where the door should have been and pressed my palms flat against it, feeling for any irregularity, any seam, any give. The wall was solid. Not hollow, not ringing with the sound of empty space behind plaster. Solid. Load-bearing solid. I knocked on it in several places, the way you knock on a wall to find a stud, and the sounds were uniform, not the varying register of a wall with a hollow cavity. Just wall. Just solid, continuous final wall. I am going to tell you what happened in my chest and my throat in that moment, because I think it matters and I think you should know. It wasn't a movie panic. It wasn't screaming or hyperventilating or dissolving into terror. It was something quieter and more terrible than any of that. It was the specific kind of fear that comes from the ground falling away, not dropping, not collapsing, but simply ceasing to be present beneath your feet. The fear of a framework failing. For 34 years, I had organized my experience of the world around the certainty that walls either had doors or they didn't. That a door either existed or didn't exist. That reality was, at minimum, internally consistent from one moment to the next. The wall in front of me was the first genuinely unanswerable thing I had ever encountered, and what I felt as I stood pressing my hands against it was grief. Actual, heavy, specific grief for the version of the world I had trusted, which was dying in real time as I stood there. I backed away from the wall. I tried the hallway. The 3 doors, only 3, all with brass knobs, the 4th and 5th doors as completely absent as the front door, were locked. I tried the parlor, thinking that perhaps the house's logic extended to the windows, that one of them might offer egress. The parlor was as I had left it. Sofa, armchairs, fireplace, the glass of water on the low table. I went to the nearest window and tried to raise it. Painted shut. I looked around the parlor for something to break the glass with and found nothing heavy enough among the sparse furniture. I went back to the fireplace and rummaged in the ash-filled grate for a piece of the rusted iron grate that might serve as a tool, and I found a length of metal bar perhaps 2 feet long, detached from the rest, and I went to the window with it. And here is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the moment when I began to genuinely lose my grip on what was happening. I raised the bar. I swung it at the window, and the bar passed through the glass as if the glass were not there. Not breaking it, passing through it. The sensation traveled up my arm. The bar met no resistance. I watched it swing through where the glass should have been into empty air, and then I reached out with my bare hand and touched the window glass and felt it, solid, cold, real under my fingertips. Real to my touch. Not real to impact. I put the bar down on the floor. I sat down next to it. I pressed my back against the wall below the window and I looked at the room around me, at the sourceless light and the furniture and the glass of water that was still clear, still fresh, still harboring its tiny interior bubble. And I said to the house, to the thing that the house either was or contained, "What do you want?" The light changed. Not dramatically, no flickering, no darkening, no cinematic dimming. It simply changed quality, the way afternoon light changes when a cloud passes over the sun, except there was no cloud and no sun, and the change was not in the direction of darkness but of a kind of closer attention. The light seemed to lean in. I know how that sounds. I am telling you what I perceived. The glass of water moved. It moved the way things move when a vibration travels through the surface they're resting on. A slight agitation of the water's surface, rings moving outward from a center, the glass itself shifting perhaps half an inch to the left. The table had vibrated. Something below the table, below the floor, had caused a vibration. Something down in the earth beneath the house, slow and enormous and intermittent, like a heartbeat with an irregular and geological rhythm. I felt it through the floor as a subsonic pressure, less a sound than a change in the air, the way you feel a subwoofer in your chest. I felt it 3 times with irregular spacing, and then it stopped and the water stilled, and the glass sat half an inch from where it had been, and the light continued to lean. I stood up. I went back to the foyer. The front door was there. This is the thing I cannot explain, the thing at the center of everything, the thing that I have described to 3 different therapists with 3 different frameworks for understanding reality, and none of them, not one, has given me an explanation that accounts for all of the observed facts. The front door was there. 4 inches open. The same 4 inches it had been open when I arrived. The same thin admission of the impossible light. I went to it. I put my hand on the edge of the door. The wood was cold. I pulled it open. The porch. The steps. The overgrown driveway. The trees. The night sky with its full population of October stars. Everything where I had left it, arranged with photographic fidelity to the world as I understood it, the world as I had trusted it to be. I stood on the porch and looked out at all of it for a long moment, and then I looked at my phone. 8:47 p.m. The same time it had displayed when I was on the 2nd floor. 40 minutes had passed inside the house, and none of those minutes appeared to have registered on any instrument capable of measuring them. I went down the porch steps. I went down the driveway. I did not run. I got in my car and I sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, and I was shaking badly by then, badly enough that I waited several minutes before I trusted myself to drive. I drove back to the highway. I drove back to my apartment. I sat on my couch with all the lights on and I tried to write down everything that had happened in the clear, sequential manner I would have used to file an engineering report, because it was the only way I knew to process experience, and the act of imposing sequential structure on it calmed me down enough to function. I told myself I would not go back. That this was a once completed experience, something anomalous and disturbing, something I would eventually rationalize or choose to file in the category of genuinely unexplained but no longer actionable. I told myself this with great conviction. And then I drove back to Millhaven Road the following Saturday. It was the glass of water. This is the thing that kept me up in the intervening days, the thing that pulled at me with more insistence than any of the other impossibilities I had experienced. The door appearing and disappearing, the hallway stretching, the reflection with its delayed expressions. These were terrible, yes, genuinely reality-altering terrible, but they had a quality of ambiguity about them. Stress responses. Sleep deprivation. The human mind's capacity for perceiving patterns and deviations where none exist. I could build a scaffolding of doubt around each of them if I worked hard enough. But the glass of water. The glass of water in an abandoned house was fresh. It had bubbles. It had been poured recently. Whoever, whatever, had poured it had either been in that house within hours of my arrival, or it had been sitting there unaffected by physics for an indeterminate period, and neither of those options fit into the framework of a rationalized explanation. The glass of water was a question that demanded an answer, and I have never, not once in my life, been capable of leaving a question that demanded an answer unanswered. So I went back. I went in daylight this time, mid-morning on a bright Saturday, October, having decided at some point in the preceding week to make one last effort at warmth before the winter set in. The drive felt shorter than it had at night, and finding the driveway gap was harder in daylight. The trees and grass looked uniformly overgrown, without the nighttime contrast to make the gap legible. I found it on the third pass, pulled over and walked down. The house looked different in daylight. More ruined. More clearly abandoned. The peeling paint showed worse, the collapsed section of chimney gaped more obviously, the porch sagged in places I hadn't noticed in the dark. It looked like what it was, a building that had not had a living inhabitant for a long time. Years. Perhaps decades. The front door was closed, this time firmly shut, and when I tried the knob it was locked. I stood on the porch looking at the locked door and feeling a complicated mixture of relief and disappointment that I am still not sure I have fully parsed. I went around the side of the house and found, at the back, a bulkhead door leading to a basement, the kind of angled metal door flush with the ground. It was secured by a padlock that had rusted to the point of structural failure, and a moderate application of the metal bar I'd brought from my car. A crowbar, this time I had come prepared, broke it free. I went down into the basement. The basement was ordinary in every sense of the word. Stone foundation walls, packed earth floor, the remains of an oil furnace long since decommissioned. Exposed joists above me showing the underside of the first floor. A few cardboard boxes so thoroughly degraded by moisture that their contents were unidentifiable. One partial shelf holding empty mason jars. No heartbeat vibration, no sourceless light, no wrongness of any kind. Just a basement, dim and cold and entirely, disappointingly explicable. I went up through the basement stairs into the kitchen, unlocked from the basement side, and through the kitchen into the foyer, and the foyer had a front door. I counted the doors in the hallway. 3. Brass knobs. No iron knob doors, no impossible fifth and sixth companions. I went into the parlor. The glass of water was not on the table. The table was there, dusty, surface thick with the accumulated particulate of a long undisturbed space. No glass. I looked at the spot where it had been and saw the perfectly clean circle in the dust where a glass had stood, but the glass itself was gone. I photographed the clean circle and then I stood in the middle of the parlor and I turned very slowly, taking in everything, cataloging every detail, and what I noticed was how completely normal the room was. Not the alive wrongness of my first visit. Just a room. Just furniture. Just dust and cold and the dead smell of a building that no longer breathed. I sat in one of the armchairs facing the fireplace. I had brought a thermos of coffee and I drank some of it and I looked at the fireplace and I thought about the figure at the treeline, and the reflection with its curious expression, and the sound of fingernails on glass from the wrong side of the mirror. And while I was sitting there, a fire started in the fireplace. Not a large fire. Not a dramatic, roaring horror movie fire. A small fire, contained perfectly within the firebox, burning without any evident fuel, flickering with the particular gentle irregularity of a fire that has been burning for a while and has settled into its rhythm. The kind of fire you'd come home to, if you had a home with a fireplace and someone who loved you enough to light it for your arrival. It was, in its way, the most frightening thing I had seen in that house, precisely because it was so domestic, so carefully calibrated to suggestion of welcome. The house was offering me something. A fire. Warmth. The version of itself that wanted me to stay. I sat in the armchair with my coffee and I watched the fire and I said again, "What do you want?" And this time something answered. Not in words. Not in sound. The answer came in the way the room changed around me, slowly, so slowly that I didn't notice it happening until it had already substantially occurred. The dust on the table was gone. The wallpaper was no longer peeling but fresh, slightly different in pattern from what I remembered, green and gold rather than green and cream. The sofa had changed color, from the bone white of faded fabric to a deep, saturated green that matched the wallpaper. The fire was larger, more established. The room was warm. And there was a second chair at the table, a wooden kitchen chair that I was completely certain had not been there 60 seconds ago, and on the table next to the clean circle where the glass of water had been was a full teacup, steam rising from it in a thin and perfectly vertical column, which meant there was no air movement in this room at all, which meant the room had sealed itself. The chair was positioned across the table from where I was sitting, angled slightly toward me. An invitation, or a demand. I did not sit in it. Instead, I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on the teacup, and I said very quietly, "You want someone to stay." It wasn't a question. The fire popped once, sharp and percussive, and the sound was less like burning wood and more like an affirmation. "You want company," I said. The steam from the teacup moved, not blown, not disturbed, but reoriented, the thin column curving toward me the way a plant curves toward light. "You've been alone for a long time." The room got brighter. Not the leaning-in brightness of my first night, but something more expansive, more open, a light that had warmth in it for the first time. And standing in that brightened room, in the impossible warmth of a fire with no fuel, I felt the most extraordinary thing. I felt welcome. Not the welcome of a host who wants something from you. A welcome that was older and more patient than that. A welcome that had been waiting. That's when the time loop started. I was in the foyer. I had just come through the front door, which was standing 4 inches open. The parlor was to my left, emitting its sourceless light. I was in the foyer and I had just arrived and I had not yet gone into the parlor and I had not yet counted the hallway doors and I had not yet climbed the stairs. It was 8:07 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October and I had just stepped inside for the first time. I stood in the foyer and I knew, with an absolute and physically nauseating certainty, that I had done this before. Not the vague déjà vu of ordinary consciousness, not the sensation of familiarity without specificity. I knew the glass of water was in the parlor. I knew there were 3 doors in the hallway with brass knobs and 2 more beyond them with iron knobs. I knew the hallway upstairs would appear to stretch and then contract to something reasonable when I wasn't watching it directly. I knew about the mirror. I had memories of the next 40 minutes that were as clear and specific as the memory of any other experience I'd had. But I was standing in the foyer at the beginning, with the front door behind me and the experience of this house stretching ahead of me, unbegun. I went through it all. Every room, every anomaly, every moment of cold dread. And I observed it differently this time, not as experience but as repetition, trying to identify the variation, the thing that was different this time from the last time, the seam in the loop where I might slip through. The glass of water was in the parlor. The hallway had 3 doors. The upstairs hallway stretched and contracted. The mirror showed a reflection with a delay. I came back down to the foyer and the front door was gone and I found the bar in the grate and tried the window and the bar went through the glass. And then I was in the foyer. I had just come through the front door, which was standing 4 inches open. The third time I tried not going into the parlor. I stood in the foyer and turned immediately to the hallway and went to the doors and I tested them and they were locked and I went upstairs and I came back down and I went to the front wall and the door was gone and I stood against the wall in the foyer and I refused to move. I sat down on the floor with my back against the doorless wall and I closed my eyes and I stayed there, not moving, not exploring, waiting. Waiting for whatever mechanism governed this loop to respond to my refusal to participate in it. I felt the heartbeat through the floor. 3 slow pulses, the enormous subsonic rhythm of whatever lived beneath the house. And then I was in the foyer. I had just come through the front door, which was standing 4 inches open. The house had reset me. My refusal to move was simply another path through the same territory, and the territory ended in the same place. The beginning. How many times did I loop? I don't know. I lost count after 7. I stopped counting after I realized that counting was a form of hope. The hope that a high enough number would constitute something, would trigger a response, would eventually be enough. The house didn't care about my count. The house had been counting something far longer than I had. What I know is that by the end, by whatever constituted the final loop, I knew that house the way you know a space you've lived in for years. I knew which floorboards would talk and which would stay silent. I knew the exact temperature differential between the foyer and the parlor and the second floor. I knew the specific quality of the sourceless light in every room at every point in the 40-minute cycle. I knew the sound of that single footstep from the second floor. I knew the feeling of the wall where the door was not. And I knew, gradually, through repetition, through the accumulation of all those identical and subtly informative laps through the same territory, what the house was trying to show me. Not what it was trying to do to me. What it was trying to show me. At some point in what must have been the final loop, I sat in the parlor chair again, in front of the fire that had no fuel, with the teacup steaming on the table in front of the empty chair. And I did not speak. I had run out of things to say. I just sat and I looked at the fire and I thought about the fact that I had been going through this house, alone in this loop, for what felt like years of compressed subjective experience, and I was not getting more frightened. I was getting something else. Something that took me an embarrassingly long time to name, because it was not an emotion I associated with the experience of being trapped in a reality-warping abandoned farmhouse. I was getting sad. Not frightened sad. Just sad. The plain and recognizable sadness of someone sitting across an empty chair from a thing that wants desperately to not be alone. The sadness of comprehension. Because the house wasn't a haunting and it wasn't a trap. The house was a longing. It had been left, by whoever had built it, whoever had filled it with furniture and poured water into glasses and lit fires against the October cold, and the leaving had done something to it, had bent the space inside it out of shape the way a magnetic field bends iron filings, had turned it into a place where the physical laws that govern ordinary space no longer fully applied. Because a space that has been suffused with enough human life, human warmth, human presence, and then suddenly and completely emptied of all of it, what does that space become? What does the physics of abandonment look like? It looks like doors that appear and disappear. It looks like rooms that can't stop rearranging themselves in pursuit of the configuration that might make someone stay. It looks like a glass of water, eternally fresh, eternally ready, eternally waiting for the guest who never comes. It looks like a reflection that watches you with curiosity instead of mirroring your fear, because the thing in the mirror has been waiting so long for a face to look at that it has forgotten that the proper response to being looked at is to look back without wanting. The fire went out. Not dramatically, it simply wasn't burning anymore, the way a fire isn't burning when you come into a cold room in the morning and the grate holds only ash. The light shifted back to its sourceless flat quality. The teacup was still steaming, which was not physically possible, but physical possibility had stopped being a reliable constraint some number of loops ago. I picked up the teacup. I wrapped both hands around it, feeling the warmth. I looked at the empty chair. And I said, for what I knew by some instinct that had been calibrated through repetition was the last time, I have to go home. I'm sorry, but I have to go home. The front door from the foyer made a sound. The sound of a latch being drawn back. The sound of a door opened from the other side. I stood up. I put the teacup down. I walked through the archway into the foyer, and the front door was open. Wide open, not 4 inches but fully open, thrown back against the porch railing, and through it came the cool night air and the smell of autumn leaves, and somewhere distant on the highway the sound of a truck passing. The world. The outside world, continuous and indifferent and operating on the physics I'd been taught to trust. I walked to the door. I put my foot on the threshold. I stopped. I turned back to look at the foyer, the stairs, the hallway, the archway to the parlor, from which the sourceless light still emanated, steadily, patiently, eternally. And I said to the house one more time, I'm sorry. The light in the parlor dimmed. Just slightly. Just enough. An acknowledgement. I left. That was 14 months ago. I have driven past the turnoff for Millhaven Road approximately 20 times since then, because my route to the engineering firm I've been contracting with takes me within 4 miles of it, and every time I drive past the turnoff I feel the pull, not the irresistible magnetic pull of that first night, but a gentler and more specific pull, the pull of knowing that something is there that I understand, that is alone in its understanding, that is waiting in the specific and infinite patience of a thing that has nothing to do but wait. I haven't stopped. I've come close. Once, in January, I actually pulled over at the junction for Millhaven Road and sat with my blinker on for almost a full minute before a car came up behind me and I drove forward. I told myself it was the approaching car that made me go. I'm not certain that's true. Here's the part one haven't told anyone. Here's the part that I have written in the engineering report style in my notebook and then crossed out and rewritten and crossed out again, because every time I write it down it seems either too small or too vast to be contained in ordinary language. Here's the part that, if I'm being honest, is the real reason I'm telling you all of this now. The week after I got home from the house, I was unpacking a box from my old apartment. Stuff from my marriage, things I hadn't looked at since the divorce, objects that had sat in boxes through the move because dealing with them felt too heavy. And at the bottom of one of these boxes, wrapped in newspaper from 3 years ago, was a photograph. A wedding photograph. Not mine, I don't know whose. An old photograph, black and white, a couple standing in front of a farmhouse on what appeared to be their wedding day. The woman in a simple dress, the man in a dark suit, both of them squinting slightly in what must have been strong summer sun. Both of them smiling with the specific and hopeful intensity of people who believe they are at the beginning of something that will last. The farmhouse behind them had a wide front porch, decorative wooden trim, a steep pitched roof, a central chimney intact in the photograph, fully intact, not yet collapsed. I did not recognize the house at first. I looked at the photograph for a long time before I turned it over because I was afraid to turn it over, afraid of the specific information that the back of a photograph sometimes carries. Names, dates, places, written in the faded ink of someone who had expected these details to matter to someone eventually. On the back, in a careful cursive hand, our house. October 12, 1923. I have no explanation for how this photograph was in my box. I have no explanation for how it could have been mixed in with belongings from an apartment I'd lived in for 8 years, in a city 400 miles from Millhaven Road. I have no explanation for why the couple in the photograph were dressed for a wedding, or why the date on the back was October, or why the farmhouse behind them was the farmhouse on Millhaven Road in every particular I could identify. I have no explanations that fit inside the framework I once trusted. What I have, instead of explanations, is a growing and deeply uncomfortable understanding of what I experienced in that house. Because if the house has been alone since 1923, if whatever happened to that couple happened in or around October of that year, if the house has been sitting at the end of that overgrown driveway for over a century, resetting and rearranging and waiting, pouring fresh glasses of water in empty rooms, lighting fires in cold fireplaces, watching the road for headlights that might pause, that might turn, that might come down the driveway toward it, if that is what happened, then the 40 minutes I spent inside it, however many times I lived them, are 40 minutes of company in 100 years of silence. And that thought is unbearable. I mean that in the most literal and specific way available to me. I cannot bear to hold it for too long without feeling something that I am no longer capable of naming, something that lives in the neighborhood of grief but is not quite grief, something more like a guilt that has no clear object and no possible resolution. I was inside that house and I left. I said I was sorry and I left. The house opened its door for me and let me go, and I went, and every time I drive past the Millhaven Road junction I think about a glass of fresh water in an empty room and I wonder if the bubble is still there, still clinging to the inside of the glass, still waiting to be noticed. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before Millhaven Road. Reality is not a fixed thing. It is maintained. It is maintained by agreement, by the shared and constant commitment of conscious minds to the same version of events, the same physical laws, the same logical architecture. A space that loses all of its conscious inhabitants does not simply empty. It loses its maintenance. It begins slowly to drift, to unspool, to reach for contact with the desperate, patient, undiminishing longing of something that was once full of human life and no longer knows how to be without it. The house on Millhaven Road is not haunted. It is not evil. It is not a trap or a curse or a predator. It is the physical record of an absence so complete and so prolonged that the absence itself has become structural. It is grief rendered in drywall and hardwood and an impossible light. And sometimes, at 3 a.m., when the apartment is quiet and the television has auto-shut off and the city outside is doing its best impression of silence, I can hear, at the very edge of audible frequency, 3 slow and enormous pulses. Subsonic, patient, regular in their irregularity, like a heartbeat, like something below the ground that has been counting the time not in minutes or hours or years but in the endless interval between one set of footsteps and the next. It's counting right now as you're listening to this. Wherever you are in the dark, it is counting, and it knows how to wait. I found the photograph again this morning. I hadn't touched it in 14 months. I'd put it in a drawer and covered it with other things and done an adequate job of not thinking about it. But this morning I opened the drawer for something unrelated, and there it was at the top, as if it had moved there on its own, the couple smiling in the summer sun in front of their house. Intact chimney, fresh paint, wide hopeful porch. I turned it over. The back now says something different. Not the original inscription. Something new, in a different hand, my hand or something that has learned to replicate my hand, 3 words in the careful cursive of someone who has been practicing for a very long time. Come home soon.